London, late on a Friday afternoon. The rain had just stopped, leaving the streets of Mayfair shimmering beneath the glow of street lamps. Luxury cars pulled up in a steady line outside the Regent's Crown, a prestigious hotel restaurant where Britain's elite came to be seen. That night, all eyes were fixed on the main table in the center of the grand dining room. There sat Sir Malcolm Ashford, a real estate tycoon whose fortune stretched across the country.
His reputation preceded him, sharp-tongued, merciless and feared. Stories about him were whispered by staff. Waiters dismissed on the spot for spilling a drop of wine, chefs driven out mid-service for the slightest mistake. No one wanted to be noticed by him, because to be noticed meant to risk humiliation. Yet into this charged atmosphere stepped Emily Turner, a 27-year-old waitress who had only been working here for 3 weeks.
With bright eyes and trembling hands, she carried a tray of wine towards the table. A colleague had warned her before the shift began. If he looks at you, just smile and bow. Don't try to be different. The sound of her heartbeat drowned out the soft piano music as she approached. Every step felt like walking a tightrope where a single slip could end everything. Malcolm looked up. His piercing gaze fell on Emily, and a slow, mocking smile spread across his face.
"At last," he said loudly, enough for his companions to laugh along. "Someone bold enough to look me in the eye." Emily steadied her breath. Her voice was calm, measured. "Good evening, Sir Ashford. Here is the wine you requested." The dining hall froze for a moment before erupting with a ripple of arrogant laughter from his entourage. Malcolm tapped his fingers against the polished mahogany table, as if testing her composure. In that instant, Emily realized this would not be an ordinary shift. This was going to be a trial that might change her life. As Emily held her ground beside the tycoon's table, she couldn't stop her thoughts from drifting back to the reasons that had led her here. Just 6 months earlier, her life looked very different. She had been a trainee teacher in Birmingham with dreams of inspiring young children. But when her father suffered a sudden stroke, Emily abandoned her studies to care for him. Their modest savings quickly dwindled. The bills grew heavier, the rent loomed larger, and soon the only choice she had left was to take whatever job she could find. The Regent's Crown was never meant to be permanent. It was survival. Yet even here, she felt the constant weight of judgment, the invisible walls between the wealthy diners and the staff who served them. Back in the restaurant, Sir Malcolm's laughter cut through her thoughts. He raised his voice again, ensuring the whole dining room could hear. "Tell me, girl, how long have you been carrying trays instead of books? Or is this all you've ever been good for?" The guests at nearby tables lowered their eyes, pretending not to hear. That was the rule in rooms like these. See nothing, say nothing. Emily's pulse raced. Every instinct told her to bite her tongue, smile politely and walk away. Her job and her father's care depended on it. But something inside her tightened, a small flame of defiance that refused to die. She set the wine bottle down firmly, her voice quiet but unwavering. "I am here to work, Sir Ashford, and I'll do my work with dignity." For a moment, silence fell. The laughter at Malcolm's table faltered. His companions glanced at one another, surprised that anyone, especially a waitress, had dared to speak with such calm resolve. Malcolm leaned forward, his steel-grey eyes narrowing. His tone dropped, sharp as a blade. "Dignity? In my presence, girl, you have none. Remember that." Emily's heart thundered, but she did not flinch. She knew she had just crossed a line, one that no one before her had ever dared to cross. The dining room's atmosphere grew heavier, as though every guest sensed a storm about to break. Emily stood frozen, tray still in hand, while Sir Malcolm toyed with his glass. His voice carried effortlessly across the hall. "You claim dignity," he sneered. "Then show me how much you're willing to defend it." With that, He flicked a piece of bread from his plate. It landed on the marble floor beside Emily's shoes. A cruel smirk spread across his face. "Pick it up. That's where you belong." A hush fell. No one dared move. No one dared breathe. It was a spectacle Malcolm had orchestrated countless times before, breaking people with gestures as small as this. Emily's cheeks burned. Her knees trembled, but she locked her gaze on him. For a second her father's face flashed in her mind, lying in a hospital bed, whispering to her that pride was the only thing no one could take. She drew a breath. "No," she said softly, but with a firmness that cut through the hall. The room stirred. A woman at the corner table whispered to her husband, "Did she just refuse?" His eyes darted nervously toward the tycoon. Malcolm's expression shifted.
The mockery drained from his features, replaced by cold fury. He leaned forward, his hand tightening on the stem of his wineglass. "No." His voice was low, almost a growl. "Do you even understand what that word means when you say it to me?" Emily's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. "It means I won't be humiliated. Not tonight. Not ever." The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Even Malcolm's companions, usually quick to laugh at his cruelty, avoided his eyes.
Then came the sound, a sharp crack as Malcolm slammed his glass onto the table. Red wine splashed across the pristine white cloth, staining it like blood. "You dare defy me?" he roared, the sound bouncing off the high walls. Emily didn't retreat. Her voice, though quiet, reached every ear in the hall. "Respect isn't given through fear, Sir Ashford. It's earned." Gasps erupted around the room. For the first time, someone had spoken the truth aloud. Sir Malcolm pushed his chair back with a screech that tore through the silence. Slowly he stood, towering over the table, his shoulders squared like a man about to deliver a final verdict. Every movement was deliberate, designed to instill fear. Guests at nearby tables shrank into their seats, pretending to examine their menus or sip their wine, but no one could ignore what was happening. The great Sir Malcolm Ashford, the man who made bankers cower and politicians bend, was being challenged by a waitress, his hand balled into a fist. "Do you know who I am?" he thundered, his voice reverberating through the high-ceilinged hall. Emily's chest tightened, yet she refused to step back. Her body shook, but her voice was steady. "I know exactly who you are, and tonight everyone else here does too." Murmurs rippled through the room. A waiter carrying plates froze in the middle of the aisle. A journalist seated discreetly near the back scribbled furiously into her notebook. The moment was no longer private, it was history in the making. Malcolm's face flushed crimson. In a sudden, almost childish gesture, he swept his plate aside. Potatoes and venison crashed onto the carpet, sauce splattering across his polished shoes. "Then clean it," he barked, pointing at the mess. Emily stood still. The tray trembled in her grip, but she didn't bend. "No?" she said again, her voice slicing through the thick air. Gasps filled the room. A few guests couldn't suppress quiet nods of approval, though fear kept them silent. From the far end of the table, one of Malcolm's own associates shifted uneasily. A younger man, perhaps in his 30s, leaned forward. His jaw clenched as though he'd swallowed his courage 1,000 times before. But tonight, something cracked. "Enough, uncle," he muttered, barely above a whisper. Malcolm snapped his head toward him. "What did you say?" The young man's voice shook, but he forced the words out louder this time. "Enough! You've humiliated enough people. Tonight you've gone too far." The hall seemed to tilt. Malcolm's own blood had spoken against him. His entourage, once so eager to laugh at his cruelty, now sat paralyzed. Emily's heart pounded, yet she sensed the tide shifting. For the first time, she wasn't standing alone. The hall vibrated with tension, as though the grand chandeliers themselves held their breath. Sir Malcolm's jaw tightened. His eyes, cold as steel, darted between Emily and his nephew. The unthinkable had happened. His power had been openly challenged, not by rivals in the boardroom, but here, in front of strangers, diners, and his own circle. He slammed his fist onto the table, sending silverware clattering across the linen.
The sound made several guests flinch. "Betrayal," he hissed, staring at his nephew. "From my own blood, and all because of her." He jabbed a finger toward Emily. Emily felt the weight of 100 eyes on her. Yet she stood tall, though her knees threatened to buckle. She wanted to run, to disappear, but something inside her anchored her in place. If she left now, she knew she'd be running for the rest of her life. Not from him, but from herself.
Malcolm turned to the restaurant owner, Mr. Harrington, an elderly man with silver hair who had been hovering at the back of the room, silent, pale with fear. "This place is finished," Malcolm roared. "By tomorrow, you'll have no license, no staff, nothing. I'll make sure of it." The declaration sent a ripple of horror through the staff. Some waiters exchanged panicked glances. The pianist faltered on the keys before stopping altogether. And then something extraordinary happened.
Mr. Harrington straightened, his frail hands gripping the edge of a chair as he stepped forward. His voice, though wavering, carried enough to be heard by all. "No, Sir Malcolm. That won't happen. Not tonight. Not ever again." Gasps rose. No one had ever spoken to the tycoon this way, especially not in public. Malcolm's face twisted in disbelief. "You dare oppose me?" The old man lifted his chin, eyes fierce despite his trembling frame. "I dare. Because this restaurant does not belong to you."
And neither does the dignity of those who work within it. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. For a moment even Malcolm seemed stunned, as though the foundation beneath his reign had been kicked out from under him. Then, with a sudden fury, he swept his arm across the table, sending glasses crashing to the ground. Red wine pooled across the marble like blood spilled in battle. Emily's heart raced, but she saw it clearly now. The fear in the room wasn't hers anymore. It was his. For a moment, the grand dining hall seemed suspended in time. Shards of crystal glittered across the floor, crimson wine creeping into the cracks of the marble. Sir Malcolm stood trembling, his chest heaving as though he could crush the air itself with rage. But then came the sound he had never expected. Applause. It started softly, from a table near the back where an elderly couple sat. The gentleman tapped his hands together slowly, defiantly. Soon another guest joined in, then another, until the clapping spread like wildfire. The hall thundered with applause, not for the tycoon, but for the waitress who stood tall and unbroken. Emily froze, breathless, unsure whether to cry or collapse. The wave of support surged around her, voices murmuring words like bravery and respect. For the first time since she'd entered the restaurant, she did not feel alone. Malcolm's eyes darted wildly, searching for loyalty among his companions. Yet all he found were lowered gazes. His associates who once echoed his laughter now shrank into silence. Even his nephew, pale but resolute, refused to look away. "You, all of you," Malcolm sputtered, his voice cracking. But no one came to his defense. Mr. Harrington stepped forward again, his tone calm yet unyielding. "Sir Malcolm, you may have money, but tonight you have nothing else. Not power, not loyalty, not respect." The words landed like blows.
Malcolm swayed slightly as if each syllable drained him of the armor he had always worn. Emily, her hands still trembling, finally spoke. Her voice clear, carried by the hush that followed. "Respect isn't bought. It isn't taken. It's earned by how we treat each other." The applause roared again, drowning out Malcolm's furious breathing. His lips moved, searching for one last insult, one last strike. But nothing came. For the first time in his life, Sir Malcolm Ashford had no words.
With shoulders slumped, he turned away from the table. The crowd parted silently as he walked toward the exit, his figure smaller with every step until the great doors closed behind him. Emily stood there, her chest pounding, her knees weak. She had not expected to win, yet somehow she had. The echoes of applause lingered long after Sir Malcolm had left the hall. Slowly the guests began to breathe again, voices rising in hushed conversations. Some were shaking their heads in disbelief, others whispering words of admiration for the young woman who had dared to stand her ground. Emily lowered her tray, her hands still trembling. She half expected Mr. Harrington, the owner, to tell her she was dismissed, that no one could risk angering a man as powerful as Malcolm Ashford. But instead, the elderly gentleman placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You are not fired," he said firmly, loud enough for others to hear. "On the contrary, thank you. You've shown us all something tonight." Relief and disbelief washed over Emily at once. Around her, fellow staff members, people who had lived under the shadow of Malcolm's arrogance for years, looked at her with new eyes. No longer pity, no longer fear, but respect. In the days that followed, the story spread far beyond the gilded walls of the Regent's Crown. Newspapers picked it up, headlines proclaiming, "Waitress defies tycoon in London's most exclusive restaurant." Blogs praised Emily as a symbol of dignity. Even social media buzzed with her name, though she herself avoided the spotlight. Back at the restaurant, something remarkable shifted. The staff began to hold their heads higher, speaking openly about problems without fear of reprisal. Guests too seemed different, less entitled, more cautious, as though they'd learned that power could be questioned. But perhaps the most striking change came from Malcolm's own circle. His nephew, the young man who had dared speak against him, returned days later, not to reclaim wealth or privilege, but to thank Emily privately. "You gave me the courage I never had," he admitted. "All my life I let him dictate who I was. But watching you that night, it broke the spell." Emily, still modest, simply replied, "It wasn't about courage. It was about not losing myself." Those words traveled further than she ever imagined. Soon, schools invited her to speak to students about self-respect. Community groups asked her to share her story, and strangers would stop her in the street to thank her. She hadn't intended to become a symbol, but sometimes symbols choose us, not the other way around. Weeks passed, yet the memory of that evening refused to fade. Guests who had witnessed the confrontation told the story again and again, each version carrying the same message: that true strength does not lie in wealth or intimidation, but in the quiet courage to say enough. Emily continued working at the Regent's Crown, but she was no longer just another face in uniform. To the staff, she was a reminder that dignity mattered more than fear. To the community, she became an unexpected symbol of resilience. Parents pointed her out to their children when they visited the restaurant, whispering, "That's the woman who stood up to him." Even Sir Malcolm's name began to change shape in the city. Once spoken with dread, it now carried a trace of pity. His empire still stood, but his image was fractured. For the first time, people saw him not as untouchable, but as a man exposed, stripped of the illusion of respect he had long demanded. On a quiet night, after the last table had been cleared, Emily sat alone at the very spot where it had all begun. She placed her hand on the polished wood, tracing the faint scratches left by shattered glasses. The room was empty, yet she felt surrounded by echoes, her own trembling voice defying him, the roar of applause, the steady words of Mr. Harrington, the quivering but determined tone of Malcolm's nephew. Her heart swelled, not with pride, but with a simple truth. Sometimes the most ordinary people are called to moments they never expected. And in those moments, one choice can ripple outward, changing more lives than we ever realize. She smiled faintly. Courage isn't the absence of fear, she thought. It's choosing to act despite it. Emily rose, switched off the lights, and stepped into the cool London night. The city stretched endlessly before her, filled with challenges she couldn't yet see. But she no longer feared what lay ahead, because she had learned one thing: the power of one voice, however small, could shift an entire room, and perhaps even a city. Closing reflection for viewers. If you had been in that dining hall, would you have stood up for dignity or stayed silent like so many others? Tell us in the comments below.